Hey folks, Michael Mann from Michael Mann Security Services. Today we're going to talk about suspicious item identification and response. But before we get into it, as always, let's talk about how you can get a hold of us. All right? You can get our website at michaelmannsecurityservices.com. Lots of free stuff on there. So there's some videos on there. So don't forget to visit us. You can call us 606-1006. You can email us at scottm, SCOTTM, at michaelmannsecurityservices.com, or you can get us on Facebook or Instagram at Safe with Man. Obviously, if you're on our Facebook page, you already know that. All right, lots of good stuff on our Facebook page, lots of free good info like here. So please visit us. All right, expectations for this presentation or this webinar. Number one, about 25 to 30 minutes. This will be a quick one, but lots of good information. And I hope you guys stay tuned in. Hey, look, this is recommendations based on program creation and development. Same thing. I've created these programs for big corporations, churches, you name it, private Christian schools. So this is where this is coming from. We're not just making this up. Hey, take notes. At the end of this, there'll be a Q&A. So if you've got questions, or any time during this presentation, please shoot those questions to Scott. Scott's actually monitoring Facebook as we speak, and at the end of this, he's going to shoot those questions to me, or he'll read the questions, and I'll answer them for you at the end of this, okay? So if you have any questions, please write those down or send them to Scott right now. He's monitoring, and he'll give me those questions at the end of this, and we'll hit a quick Q&A. All right. So as we always start with, let's talk about just opportunities for team development. When we start to talk about this issue of suspicious items, one of the reasons we talked about this, a couple of weeks ago, I was looking at one of the church security pages on Facebook, and somebody asked the question, hey, how do you guys deal with this? What do you deal with suspicious packages, something that's been left behind? How do you evacuate your sanctuary if you find something? What does that mean? And so all kinds of responses. Specifically, some responses about making people leave backpacks at home and opening bags. So I want to address that. I want you guys to think about this a little bit differently. We're going to address this from a physical security design standpoint, not from a law enforcement or public safety standpoint, okay? But from physical security and protection, very specifically for the church or your house of worship. All right, so one, safety team's primary objective is not to restrict or deny access to the church. Let me say that again. If you're a church safety or security team, your primary objective is not to restrict or deny access to the church. So if as a security team, if that's what you think your primary duty is, that's not the case, all right? As a protection professional, which you are, even if you're volunteering, you are a protection professional, you have a servant's heart, you are there protecting the church. Your job, primary objective, is early identification of threat-related incidents. That is your job as a protection professional, protecting your house of worship with a servant's heart. And what that means is I'm going to see something, or I want to see something before it actually happens or as it's starting to occur, all right? So that is prevention. Early identification of a problem so we can address it before it gets inside the church. If you tuned in last week when we talked about site emergency plans, I told you that we break threats down into threats or emergencies into three categories. Intentional, which is the human stuff. That's the active shooters, crime-related kind of stuff. Unintentional, slips, trips, and falls, medical emergencies, and natural. So those natural events, weather. Most of the time we're talking about weather. So your job or your primary objective is early identification of these threat-related incidents, not primarily to stop people from coming in, all right? Because that's the opposite of our mission anyway. Our mission of the church is to get people to come inside. All right, public safety-driven protocols may not work in the church environment. I'll cover this in a few minutes. So, look, I know resources are limited. And sometimes you have to use Google Fu, right, or Kung Fu, right? So you got to use that. Here's the thing, just like with site emergency plans, Google is not your friend, folks, okay? Public safety protocols, if you look up stuff online, they start talking about addressing abandoned backpacks or what's a suspicious item and what is not. If you do some research, that was driven after 9/11. And so a lot of protocols that you see that are public safety driven apply to someplace like a train station. It doesn't necessarily apply to a church. An empty bag or an abandoned bag at a train station with people that are coming in and out constantly, that's probably suspicious. In the church, it may not be. So again, Google is probably not your friend in this situation. Conflict avoidance should be implemented into your design criteria. You guys have heard this before from me. Conflict management or conflict avoidance, we can look at this a couple different ways, but for the church very specifically, what that means is our physical protection program cannot conflict with the mission of the church. And if we think our primary objective is to stop people coming in with backpacks, we are conflicting with the mission of the church. All right? And so that's what this presentation is going to address. And hey, folks, at the end of the day, I'm here to give you information for free to help you protect your ministry. I'm not here to tell you what to do, force you into doing something that you don't want to do, or tell you to do something that you don't have the resources to actually, and so you can actually be able to follow through with that mission or objective. I'm just here to give you some information and some things to think about as you start to protect your ministry. All right? So let's talk about the basic steps. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. It's got to be numbers. It's got to be acronyms. It's got to be colors or something very, very basic, or I won't remember it. And so that's why I treat this the way that I treat it. This is security proof, folks. Security proof. We'll remember it in basic steps. All right. So the first step when you start looking at suspicious items or unattended items and how you deal with that is, one, identify your threat spectrum. Here's what a threat spectrum is. It is what you're protecting the church from. And you may look at me and ask, well, how do we do that? No different than when we talk about site emergency plans. The very first thing I want to do is get information. So here's how you, as a security professional protecting your house of worship, goes through this process. Number one, what has happened at your church in the last 2 years? What's happened? Have you had somebody run with a backpack with an explosive device? Probably not. We haven't heard about it if that's been the case. And if it has, please email us and let us know, because I want to know all about that situation or that incident. So what's happened at your church over the last couple of years? Go back, write that down. That's going to help you start to develop what your threat spectrum is. What has actually occurred that's a threat-related incident? Intentional, natural, or unintentional? What has happened? What was it? What's the environment of your surrounding area? What's happened? What's crime look like across the street? And how does that impact what's happening at your church or your house of worship? What does that mean? So is your environment somehow impacting your operations, and does that bleed over and cause some sort of a threat-related issue to you or your congregation? And then other churches. What's going on in other churches throughout the country? So this is how we start to develop on the information piece, how we start to look at our threat spectrum. So the very first step is identify your threat spectrum. That's how you get information. Now we start talking about the bad guy, very specifically intentional, right? So if we're thinking about somebody bringing a bag in and it's suspicious and we're worried about it, so we start to get into profiling capabilities. And what that means is the profile is just basic information about the person that might have caused them these problems as you start to look at information. So what were the adversaries' methods of targeting? So with other churches with intentional threats or problems, how did they target that church? See how you can get that information. Weapons used. Did they use explosives? Did they use handguns? Whatever. What did that look like? And what were the methods of concealment? So something I want to talk about with backpacks and with bags in churches is I'll go back through the active shooter events of these attacks on churches in the U.S. over the last 19 years. Folks, they're not sneaking stuff in backpacks. They're not sneaking stuff in baby carriages. They're not sneaking stuff in diaper bags. They're not even sneaking in gym bags. When I start to look, especially with handguns and even now shotguns and shoulder-fired weapons, they are concealing this stuff, their means, either underneath a shirt or in a coat. So we haven't had people bringing in atom bombs in backpacks. That's not happening. So this is a way to identify what your threat spectrum is and try to determine what it is you're trying to protect the church against, all right, or from. The next step is develop your standard based on accepted norms. Here's what this means. What is acceptable in that protected environment that you're in? And so what that means is what happens every Sunday and what are we used to seeing? Here's what, what I don't like to see, folks, is when the physical protection program, because we're not practicing conflict avoidance, when it actually causes a problem for the congregation. When we tell somebody, a 25-year-old mom who has 2 young kids and they're carrying a bag with diapers or a backpack or whatever, and I see church security teams searching those bags, those congregation members, or we're telling people when they can't bring bags in. So here's how you determine what that accepted norm is. Number 1, conduct an assessment. Identify what's normal for your environment. Look, if you're a security team manager at a church, if you're a team leader, or you're just that motivated volunteer that's standing post, you can do this, and here's how we do it. So the assessment, take a couple weeks and walk around or even sit in your church and look to see what kind of bags, what kind of backpacks, diaper bags, what other hand-carried items do you see in the church every Sunday, every Wednesday night, every Saturday, whenever you're having a worship service. What does that look like? What are you expecting, and what is the accepted norm? If you see these, and these come in from trusted people, then why would we stop those folks or tell them they can't bring them in? Share those findings with the safety team so they understand what the accepted norm, or what is normal, or what some people will call a baseline, what that is in the church. The goal, again, is not to restrict what can be brought into the environment. The safety team should be able to understand and identify what's accepted, which the backpack, the bag by itself means absolutely nothing. Behavior, you're looking at a combination of things. You're looking at behavior, what's normal behavior, clothing or attire, what would be normal, what's accepted in your church for that. And then, of course, going back to the hand-carried items. So it's not just a backpack. The backpack, the bag, whatever by itself means absolutely nothing, okay? So again, develop your standard based on the norm in your church, and you're going to have to do some work on this, folks. And look, you guys all know, and ladies know, if you're volunteering and you're serving on a church security team, you're doing all this for free. You're not getting paid. You've already put a lot of time into it. And to continue to have a great program like you already have, you're going to have to continue to do this, okay? All right. Here is an example of accepted norm. Now, this is when the Pope is shaking hands, and I'm gonna run this video. There's no sound, but I want to point out, as before it starts, you'll notice the Pope is shaking hands with somebody. This is how easy it is to identify an accepted norm. Now, I've got a background in executive protection and physical protection for a long time, so some of this is easy for me, but I want to show you how easy it can be for you and your team members too. So I'm going to play this here in just a second. You're going to see how these people are, there's a security guy here by the Pope, and I want you to know it's like everybody's like smiling and friendly and nice, and they're really excited to see the Pope. And then I'm going to point out something that's not normal very quickly, that's very simple to see, okay? Click it down here. Sorry about the delay. There we go. So you can see everybody's really happy on this video. They're excited. The Pope's excited to shake their hand. They're smiling. They can't wait. There's pictures. And I want you to look at this woman here. Now, look at her hands. She's not smiling. She's very intense on the Pope. It's different. Now watch what happens. Now, she did not cause any physical harm to the Pope, but there was something that she was excited about. Something was very, very different about her mannerisms, about her behavior, as opposed to everyone else. That's how easy this is to figure out your accepted norm. This backpack, when we start to talk about what's normal, this laying on a bench in a train station might be suspicious. Because in a train station, we've got the whole goal is people are coming in very quickly, they're getting on a train and they're leaving, okay? So if you find something like this at a train station or a public venue, a bus station, train station, or, a concert or whatever, that might be unusual, that might be suspicious. But maybe that sitting in your sanctuary, especially if you're used to seeing people carrying backpacks or bags, is probably not suspicious. Maybe it's just unattended, and we'll address those things, okay? Here shortly. The next step, use a layered approach. If you've listened to any of my physical security stuff, concentric rings of protection are very important for your team to protect your church. Remember, I've told you, you don't need guns to prevent violence, Okay, what you need is a good set of eyes, information, and then deterrence. So that ability to convince the adversary that not only can they not bring a weapon in without being detected, but they also maybe can't bring an explosive in a bag in if that's what you're concerned with. So concentric rings of protection. Again, the purpose is early identification of threat-related activity. As a church security professional, and you guys are all church security professionals, again, you're out there standing post every Sunday. You're watching for these things. Your job is to keep it in the parking lot. Make sure it doesn't even come in. And if I've got concentric rings of protection, those bags I'm worried about, I'm identifying those bags and maybe some odd behavior before they even come in, because I've got people out there watching well before they come through the door, so we don't have to stop them and tell them to go back to their car, okay? And of course, we're identifying this prior to this person entering the protected space, which is your church. All right? So concentric rings of protection, if I've got people on the outside, at the skin of the building, and on the inside, then that is a layered approach, and I can identify things before they actually get close to the protected space. That is the goal, okay? All right, another video, I'm going to show this real quick, okay? So this happened in Israel, Netanya, Israel, just north of Tel Aviv. This is a mall. I think this was back in 2005, maybe. There is a suicide bomber that is going to try to approach, when we start talking about a layered approach, he's going to try to get inside this mall. There's a bag, and I'm going to try to point him out so you can see him. You'll see an arrow where the Israeli consulting firm marked this video up. And you're going to see I'll try to point them out. There's an unarmed security guard that's out front practicing concentric rings. And all the malls in Israel, they're protected. They have people at the front of the malls. They have people inside. And so they use concentric rings of protection there, just like any protective environment should. And you're going to notice, because these concentric rings, this layered approach, this kid, you can read the case study, you can find it online, had a bag full of Semtex, enough to level this mall. Because of the layered approach, this unarmed security guard happens to see him, gets up, kind of starts walking toward his way, and it diverts this suicide bomber. The suicide bomber does not go in. Now, he does detonate himself outside because he gets surrounded by national police there, but he did not get inside the building. He was deterred from going inside because of the layered approach and because of observation. So I try to point it out to you. Let's see. So I'll point out the guard. So this is a layered approach. They have people on the inside, they have people on the outside. And just because he spotted him, so you can hardly see, there's a security guard kind of laid over a barrier there, like a little desk. You can see some barriers there. And you're going to see up in the right corner here in just a second, you'll see a suicide bomber right there with a big bag that's got a bunch of Semtex and it's explosive. He sees this guard. The guard's stepping out, don't know if you could see it, and it diverts the suicide bomber. Look, if nothing than an unarmed guard standing up and paying attention to a suicide bomber stops a suicide bomber from going into a mall and blowing it up, then what can we do as observant security professionals in our parking lots at churches? We can do the same thing. So the layered approach works, folks. Okay? All right. The next is identify the difference between unattended items, suspicious items, and then those explosive devices that I'm assuming when I see folks on the church security pages talk about, yeah, we're searching, we're not letting these bags come in, I'm assuming you're thinking that weapons or explosive devices are in the bag. So let's talk about the differences between those three, and this is how you address these in your protocol. So number one, an unattended item. An unattended item means an item of unknown content or origin. So we don't know what's in it. We're not exactly sure where it comes from. So an example could be, I'm assigned to the sanctuary, the worship center as a security team member. There's a break, there's a transition going to the next service. As I go in, I notice that there's a backpack sitting on a pew or in a chair or a bench. It's normal. I've probably seen backpacks before, or that's a norm. I see that. It's during transition. I don't know who it belongs to. I don't know what's in it, but it's probably just unattended. And unattended items do not necessarily have to have obvious signs of being suspicious. It's just there. If I've determined it's just unattended, so it's an accepted part of the norm there, it's something I usually see, and there's some other things that are missing, right? So some other indicators we're going to talk about in a minute. Maybe as a security team member, all I need to do is just watch it for a few minutes and wait till the service starts once people come in and see if somebody claims that bag and picks it up. Excuse me. So that is an unattended item. So it's something that's probably accepted in the norm, something we usually see. We don't know where it came from. We don't know what's in it, but we just happen to see it's there by itself. There's nobody sitting there. Maybe it's during transition. Maybe we just give it a few minutes before we start getting excited about it, okay? Then we talk about suspicious items. Suspicious items are items that are out of place and cannot be accounted for. And what that means is, number one, it's maybe it's something that's not accepted as a norm in our protected environment, okay? It's something that we don't normally see. It's some sort of an item or container that we normally do not see. And the next thing I want to talk about is, very quickly, you're going to have to do a snapshot evaluation of the location. So when I say location, what is it close to? If there were something in it and it blew up, would it kill a lot of people? Is it located next to, let's say you've got hazardous material stored on your church. Maybe you've got kerosene or some sort of fuel there or something else that could cause an explosion based on a system or an HVAC system or something that you've got in the church. Is something sitting there, that item, next to something that may be hazardous? So if it's in that kind of a location and it's not something that's not accepted, then maybe it's suspicious. Maybe that's something where I need to notify someone else. Maybe this is where I need to move somebody out of the way, or maybe we need to call somebody else in to take a look at it. So that's the difference between unattended and suspicious. We've had a lot of unattended items at the church where I manage security. Again, it's a big place. We have 2 campuses, lots of people coming in and out. We found a lot of unattended items, very few suspicious items. And then we start to talk about explosives. I'll ask the question, hey, why are you searching people's backpacks? Why are you not letting backpacks in? Well, we're afraid of improvised explosive devices. And my question is, what's an improvised explosive device look like? And I can never usually get an answer. And I'll ask, hey, what's the components of an improvised explosive device? So remember, guys and ladies, if you do look into something, for it to be an improvised explosive device, it's got to have a switch, a power source, an initiator, and an explosive. And more than likely, if you're looking into it, that's the container. And that's some things to look at. I'm looking for things like power sources like batteries. I'm looking for batteries that are connected to maybe something like a cell phone or some sort of a timer, right? Even something like fuses, okay, blasting caps, things that maybe you've seen on TV. And then, of course, this is a fuse, so something like this. And then some sort of an explosive, something as simple as black powder, or maybe something white like this, and everything's connected. Everything has to be connected. So I'm looking for very specific items that are connected or very close to each other. Batteries, a cell phone, some sort of a timer, like an egg timer or a cooking timer with a dial on it, or maybe even a digital timer. Wires, something that smells or that leaks or that looks funny I've never seen before and it looks unusual. Those are the things I have to have some kind of an explosive device. And if I don't see those things, it may not be an explosive device or an IED. So before we start calling the police and evacuating the place, we want to probably make sure that we see those things or those items, okay? When we start to develop, or you guys start to develop your response protocols, you heard this before. Number one, it's got to be relevant. Your protocols need to be relevant to the church, not a train station, not the bus station, not the mall. Your environment's different. Your accepted norm is very different than in those other locations. 2, it's got to be realistic, which means whatever you put in your response protocols, you guys need to be able to meet those objectives. So look, if I don't know how to do an assessment or you guys don't have the ability to do that, then maybe identifying some of the norms for you guys is not going to be possible. So whatever your response protocols are, they need to be realistic based on what you guys can do. And if you don't have the resource to do something, don't put it in your protocols. And then number 3, retainable. Whatever your protocols are, your team needs to remember them right away. So they're not going to be able to pick up the big book and look. If they find something and they believe it's suspicious, then they need to go automatically into that protocol. They're not going to have time, or they're not going to be able to go look at a book, because by then it could be too late if it's actually something they need to be worried about, okay? Share the protocols with church leadership. Remember, like with any plan, receive approval. Share and communicate all these protocols with the stakeholders so you can get valuable feedback, because there may be something you want to do that another ministry or another leader in that church can say, hey, we can't do that because of this. All right, maybe something you don't know, you don't see. All right, and then of course measure that effectiveness. There are basically four types of exercises you can do. So you get the protocols. As you write those up during orientation, all that means is your team hasn't seen them; they're brand new. Give them a copy of it, read it to them, make sure they understand it. That's orientation. Tabletop. You guys get together in kind of in a circle or in a square or whatever. There's a moderator. Somebody runs like a scenario, and you guys walk through a tabletop exercise. It's not pass or fail. You're just you come up with a scenario, and you're asking your responders what they do in that scenario around a table. Okay. The walkthrough is maybe you guys walk through an exercise, put people in the sanctuary, say, hey, you find this kind of backpack, what will you do? And they could walk you through the process. And then the drill is when you bring role players in. That's the final drill or exercise that you would do. All right. Remember, all this is about assessment. This is not pass or fail when you do these exercises to try to measure your plans or your response protocols effectiveness. Okay. Nope, no questions. Hey, look, send us, if you got questions later on, send us an email, Scott M, SCOTTM, at michaelmannsecurityservices.com. Again, continue to visit on Facebook. It's Safe with Man. And, of course, you can go to our website at michaelmannsecurityservices.com. Hey, thanks again for tuning in. I promise you 30 minutes or less. We're at 24. Hey, be careful out there. The country's about to start going back to work, thank goodness. We can't wait for that to happen. We can't wait to get back into our churches and get back into our families and communities. You guys be careful as that happens. There's some warnings out there by DHS. So as you guys start to pack your folks back in the churches, please be careful. Look out for each other. Look out for the people that you're trying to protect. And remember, folks, it's about prevention, not response.